Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. It's that time again, isn't it? It's a sad state of affairs that this should keep happening, but it does. As you are probably aware, a couple of days back, a 20-year-old man by the name of Adam Lanza walked into a school in Connecticut and murdered 20 children before turning the gun on himself. As is sadly usual in these kind of tragedies, we have a great many people, most of them in the media, willing to jump at the chance to make a lot of money from politicizing and covering a tragedy in the greatest possible detail, whether or not that detail is actually true. More to the point, there are strong arguments that the media is essentially an accomplice in school shootings, and as a direct result of intense media coverage, turns the shooter into an infamous anti-hero as opposed to focusing on the victims and what could best be done to help and prevent such tragedies in the future. Speaking on Charlie Brooker's Newswipe 3 years ago, Dr. Park Dietz, a forensic psychiatrist, gave his opinion rather clearly.
Well, if you want to know why not ask a forensic psychiatrist?
We've had 20 years of mass murders, throughout which I have repeatedly told CNN and our other media, if you don't want to propagate more mass murders, don't start the story with sirens blaring.
The school day had only just begun when the attacker struck.
Don't have photographs of the killer.
The 17-year-old's 3-hour rampage ended in his own death.
Don't make this 24/7 coverage.
The German Chancellor is about to give her reaction. We'll bring that to you live.
Do everything you can not to make the body count the lead story.
Carnage in the classroom, 16 people are dead.
Not to make the killer some kind of anti-hero.
Dressed in black combat gear, the gunman opened fire at random.
Do localize this story to the affected community and make it as boring as possible in every other market. Because every time we have intense saturation coverage of a mass murder, we expect to see one or two more within a week.
Now, before anyone makes the mistake of construing what I'm about to say as a criticism of the American media alone, please note that that entire clip was based on BBC News, which is, of course, a UK-based organisation. Several of the publications I will be criticising today also happen to be UK-based publications, so please do not misconstrue this as a full-on condemnation of American media. This problem is somewhat worldwide. But the media likes to give two sources, right? At least that's what they're supposed to be doing, so why don't I give you another one? This is from an article posted on Psychology Today in April of this year. It's written by Joseph Grenny. He is a behavior change expert and 4-time New York Times best-selling author. He kind of knows what he's talking about, and he too argued that the media is an accomplice in school shootings, arguing that the media amplified the violence by naming the shooter, describing his characteristics, detailing the crime, numbering the victims, and ranking him against other successful attackers. A chilling example given by the article is that on February the 2nd, 1996, a 14-year-old boy walked into his Moses Lake junior high school algebra class and started shooting. So he killed several people. He was, in fact, arrested. And the media blitz surrounding it was absolutely massive. They obsessed over the color of his clothes, his insidious planning, and the inventory of his arsenal. In addition to this, they practically provided a guide to conceal and deploying weapons in a coat by describing it in huge amounts of exhaustive detail. It also turned out that they emphasized a line that he had quoted from a Stephen King novel. A novel by the name of Rage, and as a result, there was a huge amount of coverage, and indeed, he actually became an anti-hero, some kind of horrible cultural icon. What happened? Within a week, there was another school shooting, then another one a few weeks later, and then another a few weeks later, and then 2 days after that, yet another. It's an interesting thing to note, is it not, that the media decided its focus would be a piece of literature, and indeed a quote that was given by the disturbed individual in question. Why was the focus on Stephen King's Rage? Why is that? Why was the focus not on exactly what was wrong with the killer in question, what obvious mental illness this guy actually had? Why was the focus not on concerns for the failing mental health system, the gunman's ready access to firearms, or in fact, perhaps more importantly than anything else, rising above all of the debate and politicization of these kind of issues, the actual victims? These are the people that deserve attention. These are the people that deserve sympathy, pity, and all the help that we can possibly give by the families that are torn apart by these kind of acts. Why is it that the only interest the media seems to have in the victims and those related to them is the notion of getting sound bites from traumatized 7-year-olds? Why is that the case? Why is 98% of the focus of the media on the killer himself, turning him into some kind of depraved cultural icon and a benchmark by which other psychotics rate themselves? And of course, why does the old guard media in the form of television and print news have an obsession with blaming some kind of other form of media for the actual tragedy? Let's give a few examples from this recent occurrence, shall we? UK tabloids, let's start with them, because they are, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most depraved and morally bankrupt examples of journalism in the world today. The Sun, for instance, embarrassingly, I must say, the most popular newspaper in the UK, began with a front-page spread detailing Killer's Call of Duty obsession. Followed up, of course, by a double-page spread inside with huge white letters and a black stroke surrounding it just to make sure you can't miss it. Black Ops Bunker. Killer lived in windowless lair playing violent video games surrounded by posters of weapons he plotted massacre. Call of Duty Rampage's link is the claim. A rather strange claim to be making, of course, considering that the Sun itself has covered Call of Duty over the past few months in a very positive light, hyping the game up, even providing information about a launch event that allowed Call of Duty players to get a hold of Black Ops ahead of release, a preview section claiming that Black Ops 2 was set to be the shooter of the future, and upon the game's launch describing it as graphically the game is sublime, something the series' reputation is built on. It's not subtle or tactile, it's pure, unadulterated warfare. Interesting, is it not, how quickly opinions will change when they know that newspapers will be sold as a result. Would you like something even more ridiculous? Oh, don't worry, I have it right here. The Daily Express, quoted as saying chillingly his favorite video game was said to be a shockingly violent fantasy war game called Dynasty Warriors, which is thought to have given him inspiration to act on his darkest thoughts. Dynasty Warriors, a long-running series of Japanese hack-and-slash games based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novels. A game which contains no bloody violence of any description, doesn't have decapitations, doesn't have the removal of limbs, in fact, blood spurts are not even shown on the screen. Also a game in which, more often than not, it is actually impossible to kill the characters that you are attacking. They will simply run off injured and come back later. The whole game, of course, presented in a rather colourful, cartoony style, with absolutely no predications whatsoever of being a realistic depiction of ultra-violence. Indeed, the closest thing you will get to an AR-15 semi-automatic carbine in that game is a wooden cannon. Speculation has also arisen surrounding the role of Mass Effect, the series of sci-fi RPGs, because the killer's brother had the audacity to like a Facebook page. This resulted, of course, in hysteria, and a large number of people condemning the game and calling for it to be banned without any actual knowledge of what it was or who indeed was playing it. Just a reminder, by the way, if we were to talk about Mass Effect 3, this is a game where the main character is tormented for the entire duration by the needless death of a single innocent child. And this is a game which apparently encourages the massacre of school children. I think, quite frankly, the only virtual reality that's going on here is the one that's being lived in by media talking heads. But let us not forget what is most important. The fact of the matter is that these people do not actually believe what they're saying. They are putting together a narrative that they believe the kind of people that watch television news and read tabloids actually want to hear. They believe that this is what will interest them. They believe that this is what will drive up the ratings and, as such, will sell more advertising space, or, in the case of newspapers, sell more copies. It would be unsurprising if most of you referred to this as preaching to the choir, and you're right, I don't like doing this, I hate getting even close to anything political, and quite frankly you guys know that video games do not cause violence. There is in fact no proof of that whatsoever. Studies have repeatedly found that there is no link whatsoever between increased violent behavior and consumption of violent video games. Indeed, if you'd like to fall into the correlation equals causation fallacy that it would appear that many news organizations and a lot of very dumb people around the world trumpet from the rooftops, then you would like this statistic, no doubt. A report by the Secret Service, no less, a couple of years ago, found that the most common form of entertainment for school shooters was written violence, that being in 37% of cases, while video games only accounted for 11%. This doesn't even mean that written violence actually causes this kind of behavior, far from it. but it does indicate that in fact video games are the least common form of entertainment for those that perpetrate school violence. If you need another statistic, here are a few graphs provided by the Washington Post blog. This shows a sample of 10 countries for gun-related murders and video game consumption, attempting to find some kind of link, and what it clearly demonstrates is in fact that the United States is very much an outlier here, and the other 9 are in fact nowhere close, and the line does not correlate in any way, shape, or form. Or perhaps you'd like this graph. Now, this is the number of crime victims per capita in the US, correlated with the release of some of the more popular and controversial violent video games released over the past 20 or so years. Now, let's not fall into the trap of those who are misguided or deliberately misleading people, the idea that correlation equals causation. This does not mean that video games are reducing crime. That is a fallacy. Those are two unrelated things that happen to correlate, and the assumption is being made that one caused the other. That is not how statistics work. I can give you a couple more statistics, though, if you like. The purpose of me giving you these is either so that you can actually use them in a discussion with someone that genuinely believes that video games do cause violence. Perhaps it may be your parents, your teachers, other peers, or just someone you randomly meet that happens to be pressing this view onto you, whether it be in real life or on the internet. Let's take a look at this, shall we? This was taken from CNN yesterday, and displays a rather violent and horrendous video game by the name of StarCraft 2, which is of course a sci-fi strategy game with absolutely no basis whatsoever in reality. Would you like to know a country that's a particularly large haven for StarCraft? Well, yes, that would of course be South Korea, the country that turned StarCraft Brood War into a national televised sport, a country with a massive video game culture. Would you like to know how many school shootings have been happening in South Korea lately? 0. Would you like to know how many school shootings have occurred in South Korea across pretty much all known history? 0. It goes on and on and on, and there are mountains of statistics that you can use, mountains of evidence that you can use that clearly shows there is no link whatsoever between these shootings and video games. What is always the case in every shooting is the fact that the perpetrator in question is mentally disturbed. In this state, it's very hard to figure out exactly what influenced the perpetrator in question to commit the crime. It could even be the most innocent of influences. The fact of the matter is, the mind is a very complicated thing that we sadly do not understand to the fullest as of yet. What I do understand to the fullest is the way that the media actually operates. Bear in mind the fact that the media has, for many decades now, been focused on the notion of using new forms of media as scapegoats for tragedies, whether or not it be rock music, comic books, violence in movies, or indeed now video games. Please bear in mind it is in the media's best interest to continually condemn and hammer its competition. Now make no mistake, yes, these networks are in competition with video games. In fact, their popularity is dropping off as a result of a new generation that is not interested in getting coverage from traditional sources. They do not want to watch television news and as such contribute to the advertising demographic of those networks. They also do not want to watch television in general. They have no interest in taking part in those kind of activities. They have access to the internet. They have access to every form of entertainment they could possibly ask for in an on-demand form, and will tend to avoid what has been traditionally pushed as the thing that they should be watching. Control is gradually being lost by these networks, and do bear in mind, of course, that many of these networks are also owned by larger companies that happen to own entertainment properties, such as other television networks, which are also suffering as a result of the rise of video games and alternative forms of new media. It is in the best interests of these companies to discredit and harm in every way possible video games and everything associated with them. Make no mistake. These organizations do not have the public's best interests at heart. That is not their priority. Their priority is to make as much money as possible, and the exploitation of tragedies is one way to do that. You may say, well, TotalBiscuit, aren't you just doing the same thing? You're making money from this? No. I'm not running ads on this video. I'm not monetizing this video. You want to know why? Because it's unethical. I should not be making money on the backs of dead children, and neither should these television networks. They should not be doing it by outright lying to the public. They should not be doing it by attacking their competition in an unbelievably cynical and thoroughly morally bankrupt and intellectually dishonest fashion. And yet, that is what they have done for years, now even for decades. Video gamers are not some shadowy club, they're not some clique, they're not some niche anymore. Everybody plays video games. They are ubiquitous, they are unbelievably common across the board, and they are a multi-billion-dollar industry based on the notion of entertaining people with a piece of fantasy, and nothing more than that. I could have spent a lot of time focusing on the killer, his methods, the weapons he uses, whatever he did in his off time. But you know what? That would be the exact wrong thing to do. That would be giving credit, kudos, some kind of sick recognition to someone that completely destroyed the lives of innocent children and adults and should not be given any recognition for it whatsoever. The focus should be on the victims. The focus is how can we prevent this from happening again, and how can we best support those who were affected in the most heinous, the most disgusting, disgraceful, and sickening way. You're going to hear a lot more about this over the next few weeks. You're going to hear that as a gamer, you are part of the problem. You're going to hear that the hobby that you adore and love is in fact the cause of massacres, of violence, of an increase in psychotic behavior. You may even yourself be accused, for whatever reason, by the ignorant who have eaten up hook, line, and sinker the message given out by the mass media. And I would ask you that you respond with as much understanding, sympathy, empathy, and rationality that you are able to summon. Bear in mind, these people are scared. These people are ignorant. These people are lashing out at what they falsely believe is the cause of something they do not understand. It is not your job to fight them. It is not your job to make matters worse by fueling the fire, even though that may be your immediate reaction. Please do try and educate people as to these issues. Please provide them with the facts and allow them to make an informed decision. My heart goes out to everyone affected by this tragedy. I'll see you next time.